We are rolling. All right. I've heard from many of you who have said that you are suffering from or have suffered from or constantly suffer from the very inconsistent case of the lift Faceplant Syndrome, or LFS for short. This is where you're riding your board, you're having the best time of your life, and then all of a sudden your board stops dead. You go flying forward. You wake up in the water and you're like, that was terrible, because you face planted, right? That's the F of the Faceplant Syndrome. And then you swim back to your board and everything's fine. Like your board's like, what are you talking about? I didn't stop. You just fell off. And you're like, what the hell happened? And then it won't happen again, like at all. And then 3 days later, you'll be on your board having the greatest time of your life and it'll happen out of nowhere. Usually when you're showing off, usually when people are watching you and you're like, yeah, I look so cool on this thing. And then, you wake up in the water again. I will solve it for you. I think that I found the solution to this and I can solve it for you. And you need to prep 4 things. 1, you're gonna need sandpaper. I'm gonna use 320 grit today, but I found that anything between like 300 and 400 grit is fine for what we're gonna do. I'll explain what we use this for later. 2, you're going to need 2 paper towels. Okay, so I have 2 paper towels here. You're gonna need 2 of these. They just need to be dry and clean. Next up, you're gonna need this. This is silicone-based sex lube. I am not sponsored by this brand, nor do I advocate for this, but it must be silicone-based. The reason that it has to be silicone-based is we're gonna use it on your seals, and this stuff works really well. It's very hydrophobic, or water's afraid of it. So it beads on it, it bubbles away from it. This is important. You gotta get this type. Also, it's great for sex in the shower or in the hot tub. Really, there's nothing better than this. This stuff just works with water really well. You need to get those 3 things, and you have to do one more thing. You must subscribe to Verdant Ride, because part of this solution works on karma. And if I help you out and get rid of your Faceplant Syndrome, you'd owe me. So if it doesn't work, it's probably because you didn't subscribe. Now I'm going to show you how to use this stuff to make this lift Faceplant Syndrome evaporate. We've been testing this out, and we are convinced, me and a group of other eFoilers I hang with are convinced that the cause of the lift Faceplant Syndrome has everything to do with water getting into the compartment, and in some cases, and with older boards, perhaps water entering the nose of the board if you have a crack in the front of your board. Today, I'm mostly going to deal with, this is a Lift 4 Pro. Any lift board, you don't want any water in here. You see these few drops of water that are here and here? Okay, that came in only because of water will sit on the edge of the board when it's closed like this. And when you open your board up, it comes inside. Just this little bit of water, okay? And so what I noticed is, even though my compartment stays totally dry when I ride out there, because I keep my gasket nice and conditioned and cleaned and everything, but I noticed that I started getting more and more Faceplant Syndrome issues every time I'd like swap out a battery. So on a busy day when I had a lot of friends riding and stuff and I was swapping the battery out, just this little bit of water that was just sitting on the edge that would come inside of here, and I'm here, and it'll sit right on top of this little lower part of your mast. You see that? That might not seem like that much water, right? But when it starts piling up and you're banking and cranking out there, it doesn't take that much water to surround where the antenna goes, and basically interrupt your transmission. And all it takes is just 1 split second of it where the board detects like, oh, okay, there's a transmission loss. It's actually designed to kill the prop from spinning because it thinks your controller's underwater and doesn't want the prop spinning anymore. It thinks lots of other things, but basically that interrupt is being caused by water in this compartment. And in some cases, water, especially with older boards, entering the front of the board, especially if you have like a crack or something, or even just a pinhole in the front of your board. but let's deal with the water in here. This is something we can solve right away. So first of all, before you open your board, I've just started tilting it on its side, letting all the water that's sitting in this crevice between these lines, let it pour out first, open this up, and it's always just bone dry inside. So then a lot of people, they get just like a small leak in here. Usually what's causing it is if you use your finger and you travel around this thing, what you're gonna do is, and you look at it really tight, there's a seam right, usually on all of my boards, the seam where this gasket meets end to end is right here, okay? And so sometimes that seam isn't perfect. And what I've done I have a board that used to leak a lot. Like every time I took it out, there would be water inside. I'm like, what's going on? Well, this seam right here just was not perfectly aligned. So I solved it by putting a little bit of silicone caulk, just a drop on either side of it, and it totally solved that problem. But how do you keep this healthy and keep it from leaking? If you notice water in your board, here's what we're gonna do. First, just make sure that this edge is perfectly clean. You don't want any sand. You don't want any impurities in here. And then you're gonna clean your gasket, right? That's step one. And you're just gonna make sure there's no sand or anything. Then here's another thing that I've noticed. I wanna make sure the camera sees this. Okay, I want you to take your fingers and I want you to run it along the edge of your board cover right here. Okay, I'm doing it right now. What I feel is just a little bit of grit and a little bit of roughness, right? And you can even see some of it too, right? Right here on this edge. I'm not exactly sure what causes this, but I'm gonna guess that like probably I've ridden it and it's had just like a grain or two of sand in here and it's caused a little bit of roughness here. And I found that if this gets too rough, it can't make a good seal with the gaskets. So the solution for that is why we need our sandpaper. So now I want you to take your relatively fine grit. This is 320. And I want you to find all these rough spots on your board here, on the board edge. And I want you to sand it. All right, it'll turn white. Okay, that's just the epoxy and stuff lifting up, and you only have to sand the places that you feel that kind of rough area, right? And I want you to sand it so that when you rub your finger over it, it's nice and smooth. I got a few down here. Now, I'm not too concerned about this, but when you shouldn't sand epoxy and breathe the dust. So I just kind of use down here just a wet sanding technique to keep it from going airborne. But if you're doing a lot of this, if you were doing this and it was indoors or whatever, you're gonna wanna wear a mask. And frankly, don't do it indoors, because if it's indoors and this dust were to fall on the ground, it'll be airborne eventually when people walk over it and stuff. So just be careful. You don't want to breathe epoxy dust. Oh, I got a bunch of rough spots here. Take a look down here, you see these white little things? It's almost like there's little grains of sand or something like embedded into the side. That's going to keep the board from being able to sit flat against your gasket. There we go, nice and smooth. And I'm just using this this wet cloth to take care of the dust, because you don't want that getting in there. And again, you don't want to be breathing it. But let's sand up here. Got a few rough spots here. Yeah, there we go. Nice and smooth. I had a friend who had a board that was just like it would always get half an inch of water in it every time he rode it. And so, I felt the edge of his board and I was like, dang, you got a bunch of rough spots here. What's that all about? Now, Lyft actually shipped him a thicker gasket, but I think that he would have been fine sticking with the original gasket if he just smoothed out the edge of his board. And just don't shut your board until you've rinsed all this dust off. You don't need getting this dust in your gasket. that can't do anything good for it. You want your gasket to be nice and clean, have very few impurities in it. You want it to be smooth. All right, now the edge of my board is nice and smooth. All the rough spots have been smoothed away. Now, let's treat your gasket, okay? And so what I do in this Sex Lube, I use Eros brand, but again, I'm not sponsored by anyone and I have no affiliations with anyone, so I would say that any silicone-based personal lubricant will work just fine. This stuff is awesome, and it loves sticking to things, and it doesn't dissolve rubber or latex or anything. It's, you know, it's really a perfect product for that kind of thing. And so what I do is I just pour a little bit like on an edge like this, and you don't need a ton because it goes a long way. And what I do is I make sure that I get every little corner of this with this silicone-based lube. And what you will find is that it coats your gasket in this excellent, it's like, it's kind of, it feels oily, but it's not oil. It coats it in this, and the viscosity of it is so, like, water just can't deal with it. It just bounces off of it. It beads off of it. And so I think that what it does is it helps, like, keep your gasket in good pliable condition. And then it also, like, even if it fills up these little grooves or anything, that's going to fill up with the silicone so that water won't have a place to go. Like, water hates this stuff. It's just great. Yeah, keep this around the house. If you've never used this before, you'll never buy water-based lube again. If you try this, it's fantastic. That's it. Now, I have found that since I've really taken significant care to keep water out of my board, I don't have faceplant syndrome anymore. It's gone. It's gone on all of my boards too. I did find a little crack in the front of my first board. I sanded it. I filled it. I made sure it was empty of water. I let it, like, sit so the water could drain out of it and dry out of it. I resealed it. Haven't had any faceplant syndrome with that one. So, I mean, that's it. I want you all to try this if you're suffering from faceplant syndrome. I want you to take one dry paper towel, okay? And I want you to just leave some of it in the bottom, the lowest part of your board like this. If you're riding and this comes out dry, you've solved your ingress problem, because I think it takes a lot less water than a lot of people think. And I just want you to say, okay, if this comes out dry, then you're pretty secure that there's not any water in your box, right? It's going to always go to this lowest spot right where your mast attaches. If this comes out bone dry and you're still face planting, you got another problem. In which case, I'm sorry, I didn't solve it. You can unsubscribe, I guess. But if it comes out dry and your face planting stops, I think you're going to find what most of us have found, which is the reason you're getting faceplant syndrome is that there's moisture getting on the antenna, and that's causing an interrupt in the signal, and that's stopping your board dead. And I know it's so inconsistent, but what you have to think about is your water's like, and if there's any water in your board, even just as the few drops that we saw going into my board when we opened it up, even just that little amount, when you're turning and stuff, all it takes is for enough of it to bead up on your antenna to cause that power interrupt. It's very inconsistent. And that's why it was so hard for me to like really get down to it. And it was actually a couple of my friends, like, their boards just had water in them. They didn't have a good gasket in place. One of them just had his hinges just way too cranked down so that it was crushing this part, and then it was too high in this front part. And like, his board was just like, it always had a little bit of water in it every time he rode, and he was face planting all the time. We solved that problem, and now he never ever experiences lift faceplant syndrome. So I'm pretty convinced this is it. There's other information, like, let's say that your hinges aren't tight enough. It could mean that they need to go tightening, But most of the time, people do that, and what they're trying to solve is something else, like there's just a little gap in their gasket, or maybe they've got that lift battery too tall problem, and Lift's solution is to sell them or give them a thicker gasket, which I think is nuts. But anyway, whatever, like that. Yeah, I just think they should be able to manufacture their batteries and their boards to fit each other better. And I don't find that an acceptable option at all. But yeah, I'm convinced this is it. This is what will solve your faceplant syndrome if you can make sure the inside of your board is bone dry. And it should be bone dry every single time you take it. Remember, again, tilt your board on its side before you open her up, because I don't want you to confuse water inside of your board that came in just because it was sitting here waiting for you to open it up. Really? You just gonna overheat on me like that? Okay, that camera died, so I'm counting on you, Insta360. Just make sure that you tilt your board on the side and don't confuse water that came in just because it was sitting in this part and it came inside when you opened it up. That you don't want to have happen either, but I don't want you to think that, like, oh, you've got a leak somewhere simply because when you opened it up, it came in real fast and you weren't able to tell. I don't want you to try to fix problems that you're not having. That's what I want to make sure of. Okay, that's it. Thank you for subscribing. I know I can count on all of you who watch this to subscribe. I know it because you're honest people. And I want to hear what else you find out. Thanks. See ya.